So you think the Dark Ages were all mud, misery, and missing teeth? Well, buckle up, Buttercup, because I'm about to take you on a mead-fueled journey through a time that was far more badass and weirdly cozy than your dusty high school history book ever gave it credit for. It's the year 1347. You're not scrolling through LinkedIn wondering if your boss saw your vacation request. You're not getting passive-aggressive emails about quarterly reports. You're not even thinking about your credit score because credit scores don't exist yet, and honestly, neither does the soul-crushing anxiety that comes with them. Instead, you're Thomas the baker, and you've just finished your work for the day. It's 2 p.m. on a Tuesday, and you know what? You're done. Tomorrow's a saint's day, Saint Bibiana's feast day, to be exact. So you get the day off. The day after that? Well, that's when the traveling minstrels come to town, so obviously you can't be expected to work through that cultural event. Welcome to the medieval world, where work-life balance wasn't a corporate buzzword, it was just life. Let me blow your mind with some numbers that'll make you question everything you thought you knew about historical suffering. Medieval peasants worked around 150 days a year, approximately 1,600 hours annually. That's roughly half of what the average American works today. But here's the thing, and this is where it gets really interesting, this wasn't because they were lazy. It was because they understood something we've forgotten. Human beings aren't machines. Margaret of Woolhope, a real peasant woman from 14th century England. It's October 1348, and she's just finished the harvest. The barley is stored, the wheat is threshed, and winter is coming. But instead of immediately starting some new project, instead of staying productive, Margaret does something radical. She rests. She spends her days spinning wool by the fire, telling stories to her children, visiting neighbors, and here's the kicker. She doesn't feel guilty about it. There's no voice in her head saying she should be optimizing her time or building her personal brand. She just exists in the moment, like humans did for thousands of years before we invented the concept of always being on. Medieval peasants got a week or more off at Easter and Pentecost, time off at midsummer, plus the famous 12 days at Christmas, with multiple saints' days off work every month. But here's what's fascinating. These weren't just arbitrary holidays. They were woven into the fabric of human psychology. Let's talk about Charlemagne for a moment. Charles the Great, Emperor of the Carolingian Empire, died in 814 AD. But before he died, he did something that would shape European culture for centuries. He made education a priority. Not because he wanted to create a workforce, but because he understood that human dignity was tied to human knowledge. The palace school at Aachen around 790 AD. Charlemagne himself, this massive, imposing figure 6 feet tall in an age when most people were lucky to reach 5'6", sitting in on lessons. Not because he had to, but because he wanted to. He's learning to write at age 40, forming letters with the same concentration a child might use to build a sandcastle. The scholars around him aren't just court decorations. They're engaged in passionate debates about theology, mathematics, astronomy. Alcuin of York, the school's director, challenging the emperor himself on points of logic. Can you imagine? A teacher correcting the most powerful man in Europe, and that man thanking him for it. Medieval workers had structured breaks. In winter, they worked from daylight until dark with an hour for dinner and 15 minutes for drinking in the afternoon. In summer, from sunrise until 30 minutes before sunset, with an hour for dinner and 30 minutes for drinking. But here's what those dry historical records don't tell you. What those breaks felt like. It's a summer morning in 1289. You're Robert the carpenter, working on the new cathedral in Cologne. The sun is just starting to beat down, and you've been working since dawn. Your back aches, your hands are rough, but you're not alone. Next to you, Wilhelm is humming a song. Something about a knight and a dragon, but he keeps forgetting the words and making up new ones that get progressively more ridiculous. Then the church bells ring. Not for prayer this time, but for your morning drinking break. You and Wilhelm set down your tools. Not hurriedly, not guiltily, but with the satisfaction of people who know they've earned their rest. You walk to the tavern, not because you're alcoholics, but because the ale is safer than the water, and because these 15 minutes aren't just about drinking. They're about Wilhelm telling you about his daughter's first steps. About the baker's wife sharing gossip about the merchant who's been making eyes at the blacksmith's daughter. About the traveling storyteller who's coming to town next week with tales of King Arthur. These aren't just work breaks. They're the moments that make life worth living. The surprising sophistication of medieval labor. Even serfs, who were considered particularly poorly treated, only needed to work half a day around 5 hours to fulfill their feudal labor obligations. But what they did with the rest of their time reveals something profound about medieval society. Let's follow Godwin the serf through a typical day in 1156. He owes his lord, Sir Geoffrey, labor on the manor fields. But Godwin's not just a mindless laborer, he's a specialist. He knows which fields need to lie fallow, when to plant, how to read the weather. His simple work requires a PhD-level understanding of agriculture, animal husbandry, and environmental science. By noon, Godwin has fulfilled his obligation. But instead of collapsing in exhaustion, he heads to his own small plot of land. Here, he's not a serf, he's an entrepreneur. He's growing extra vegetables to sell at market, tending to his small flock of chickens, maybe even brewing ale to trade with his neighbors. By evening, Godwin's day might include teaching his son to read. Yes, many peasants could read, at least enough to handle their own affairs. He might be working on a small wooden toy for his daughter, or listening to his wife share the day's gossip, or playing a simple game of dice with his neighbors. This isn't the grinding, soul-crushing existence we imagine. This is a life with rhythm, purpose, and here's the key: dignity. Hildegard of Bingen, the original wellness guru. Now, let me introduce you to someone who would absolutely dominate Instagram if she were alive today. Meet Hildegard of Bingen, born in 1098, part mystic, part scientist, part badass abbess who didn't take nonsense from anyone, including the Pope. Hildegard was writing about gut health, fermented foods, and the connection between diet and mental health 800 years before we discovered the microbiome. She believed that food provides each organism with fundamental energy and healing power, and that proper nutrition can prevent the need for pills later on. Picture her in the abbey at Bingen around 1150. She's not just praying, though she does plenty of that. She's in her garden, hands deep in soil, examining the way morning dew collects on fennel leaves. She's in her scriptorium, writing treatises on medicine that won't be surpassed for centuries. She's in her kitchen, experimenting with spelt bread recipes and herbal teas. Hildegard of Bingen promoted spelt food as the basis for a healthy diet along with fruits and vegetables, but she wasn't alone in understanding nutrition. The entire medieval food system was built on principles that modern nutritionists are only now rediscovering. Let's walk through a typical medieval meal, shall we? It's harvest time, 1205, and you're invited to feast at the manor of Lady Matilda of Huntingdon. The great hall is lit with torches, the air thick with the smell of roasted meat and fresh bread. But here's what would surprise you. This isn't the meat-heavy, vegetable-poor diet you might expect. The table is laden with what we'd now call superfoods. There's fermented cabbage, sauerkraut, which the Germans have been making for centuries. There's fresh-baked bread made from spelt, an ancient grain that's higher in protein than modern wheat. There are roasted root vegetables, fresh herbs, and, most importantly, everything is local and seasonal. The meat, it's from animals that live their entire lives on pasture, eating exactly what they evolved to eat. The milk and cheese, from cows that grazed on herb-rich meadows. The eggs, from chickens that roamed freely eating insects and plants. And the wine, oh the wine, not just alcohol but medicine. Medieval wine was often infused with herbs, rosemary for memory, lavender for calm, ginger for digestion. Every sip was a tiny dose of plant medicine. Medieval people easily preserved vegetables for winter by fermenting them, particularly cabbage, into sauerkraut. But this wasn't just about preservation, it was about transformation. Here's something that will blow your mind. Medieval people had better gut health than we do. Not because they tried to, but because they had to. In a world without refrigeration, fermentation wasn't a trendy health practice. It was survival. Anna the brewer, working in her small brewery in 1278. She's not just making ale. She's creating a complex ecosystem of beneficial bacteria and yeasts. Her sourdough starter has been alive for generations, passed down from her grandmother. Her sauerkraut barrels are bubbling with life, creating probiotics that modern scientists are still trying to understand. Anna doesn't know what lactobacillus is, but she knows that people who eat her fermented foods stay healthier through the winter. She doesn't understand the science of fermentation, but she can read the signs, the smell, the taste, the way the vegetables transform from tough and bitter to tangy and digestible. But here's where medieval food culture gets really interesting. It wasn't just about nutrition. It was about connection. Meals weren't consumed in isolation, scrolling through phones. They were communal events, sometimes lasting hours. The medieval dining hall wasn't just a place to eat. It was a center of social life, political negotiation, and cultural exchange. The Christmas feast at Warwick Castle in 1344. The Earl of Warwick is hosting not just his family, but his entire household, knights, servants, craftsmen, and their families. The Great Hall is packed with people from every level of society, and for this one night, they're all eating together. The food keeps coming: roasted peacock, spiced wine, honeyed cakes, fresh bread. But more importantly, the stories keep coming. The traveling minstrel is singing about brave knights and fair ladies. The old knight is telling tales of his adventures in the Holy Land. The children are listening wide-eyed, absorbing not just calories but culture. This isn't just dinner. This is how society perpetuates itself, how values are transmitted, how communities are built. Hildegard's medieval diet delineated foods according to their healing capabilities. But she wasn't unique in understanding the connection between food and health. Medieval people had a sophisticated understanding of nutrition that we're only now rediscovering. Let's talk about what medieval people didn't eat. No processed foods, no refined sugar, no artificial preservatives, no factory-farmed meat, no GMOs, no pesticides, no trans fats, no high-fructose corn syrup. Now let's talk about what they did eat. organ meats rich in vitamins, bone broth full of collagen and minerals, fermented vegetables teeming with probiotics, wild-caught fish, pasture-raised animals, seasonal fruits and vegetables, herbs and spices with medicinal properties. In the monastery of St. Gall, around 1000 AD, the monks maintained detailed records of their medicinal garden. They grew over 40 different plants, each with specific healing properties. Monks weren't just praying, they were the original biohackers experimenting with natural compounds to optimize human health. Brother Benedict, the monastery's herbalist, knows that willow bark contains what we now call salicin, the precursor to aspirin. He knows that foxglove can strengthen a weak heart, that lavender can calm anxiety, that ginger can settle an upset stomach. He doesn't know the biochemistry, but he knows the results. Let's talk about Francis of Assisi, who basically invented the concept of going viral 6 centuries before the internet. Born Giovanni di Pietro di Bernard I in 1181, he was the son of a wealthy merchant, basically the medieval equivalent of a trust fund kid. Young Francis in his early 20s, living it up in Assisi. He's got expensive clothes, he's throwing parties, he's the medieval equivalent of a social media influencer. But then something happens that changes everything. He has what we'd now call an existential crisis. One morning in 1205, Francis is praying in the dilapidated church of San Damiano when he hears a voice telling him to rebuild my church. He takes this literally at first, gathering stones and rebuilding the physical structure. But then he realizes the voice meant something bigger. Rebuild the entire concept of Christian community. What Francis did next was revolutionary. He didn't just start a monastery, he created a movement. The Franciscans weren't just religious orders. They were social networks, support systems, and economic cooperatives all rolled into one. The Franciscan friars walking through the streets of medieval towns. They're not aloof religious figures. They're embedded in the community. Brother Thomas is helping the baker's family through a difficult illness. Brother John is teaching children to read. Brother Mark is mediating a dispute between neighbors. These aren't just charitable acts. They're the building blocks of a functioning society. The Franciscans understood something that we've forgotten. Human beings are fundamentally social creatures. We need community not just to survive, but to thrive. Let's take a walk through a typical medieval village. Shall we? It's market day in Little Wickham, 1289, and the social network is in full swing. Here's Margaret the alewife, selling her brew and simultaneously serving as the village information hub. She knows that the miller's son is sweet on the reeve's daughter, that the Lord's new horse is lame, that the traveling merchant brought news of a strange comet spotted over London. Next to her, Geoffrey the carpenter is not just selling his wooden bowls. He's sharing the latest gossip from the next village over, where he was working on a new barn. The blacksmith's wife is discussing the best remedies for her baby's colic with 3 other mothers who've gathered around her stall. This isn't just commerce, it's communication. Information flows through the village like water through a stream, connecting everyone to everyone else. There are no isolated individuals, no lonely shut-ins, no one who doesn't know what's happening in their community. But here's what's really fascinating about medieval communities. They understood the psychology of belonging in ways that we've forgotten. Let's examine the village of Laxton in Nottinghamshire, around 1320. This isn't just a collection of houses. It's a carefully orchestrated social system. Everyone has a role, everyone has a place, everyone has a purpose. Thomas the plowman doesn't just work his land. He's responsible for maintaining the village's shared plow. Alice the seamstress doesn't just make clothes. She's the keeper of the village's collective memory, knowing which patterns have been passed down for generations. The children aren't just playing. They're learning the social skills they'll need as adults. The games they play are miniature versions of adult responsibilities. The boy who's good at organizing the other children might grow up to be a village leader. The girl who's skilled at mediating disputes might become a respected elder. Medieval communities had something we've lost: emotional redundancy. If you were having a bad day, there were multiple people who would notice and care. If you were struggling, there were systems in place to help you. Eleanor the widow, whose husband died in the harvest accident of 1331. In our world, she might face bankruptcy, isolation, and despair. But in medieval Little Wickham, she's immediately surrounded by support. The village takes care of her children during the day. The women of the village share their food with her. The men of the village work her land without payment. The priest ensures she has spiritual comfort. The lord of the manor reduces her rent until she can get back on her feet. This isn't charity, it's insurance. Everyone understands that they might be in Eleanor's position someday, and they want to live in a community that would support them. And when medieval people partied, they really partied. Let's crash the Feast of Fools in 1378, held in the village square of Carcassonne. This isn't just a party, it's a release valve for social pressure. For one day, the normal social order is turned upside down. Peasants mock their lords. Servants give orders to their masters. Women dress as men and men as women. Everyone acts completely ridiculous, and everyone loves it. The traveling minstrels are performing not just for entertainment, but for emotional catharsis. The songs they sing aren't just melodies. They're the shared emotional vocabulary of the community. Everyone knows the words. Everyone sings along. Everyone feels connected to something larger than themselves. Now let's talk about Eleanor of Aquitaine, who basically invented the concept of lifestyle brand in the 12th century. Born around 1122, she was one of the most powerful women in medieval Europe, Duchess of Aquitaine, Queen of France, Queen of England, and Mother of Kings. But Eleanor's real genius wasn't political, it was cultural. She transformed her court into a center of innovation, attracting troubadours, poets, and artists from across Europe. She didn't just rule, she curated. Eleanor's court in Poitiers, around 1170. This isn't just a center of government, it's a cultural laboratory. Poets are experimenting with new forms of verse. Musicians are inventing new instruments. Artists are developing new styles. But most importantly, Eleanor is redefining the very concept of romantic love. Before her, marriage was purely political. After her, the idea of courtly love, of romantic passion as a noble emotion, becomes central to European culture. These medieval communities created something we've lost: resilience. When bad times came, and they came often, people didn't face them alone. They faced them together, and that made all the difference. The Black Death of 1347 to 1351 killed a third of Europe's population. But the communities that survived weren't just the ones with the best medicine or the strongest walls. They were the ones with the strongest social bonds, the deepest connections, the most robust networks of mutual support. Let's talk about Alfred the Great, who ruled Wessex from 871 to 899 AD. He's famous for fighting the Vikings, but he should be famous for something else: accidentally inventing sustainable living. Alfred understood something that we've forgotten. Human prosperity and environmental health are inseparable. His laws didn't just govern people, they governed the relationship between people and the land. Alfred in his royal hall at Winchester around 885 AD. He's not just a warrior king, he's a systems thinker. He's looking at maps not just of territories to conquer, but of resources to manage. He's thinking about forests, rivers, fertile fields, and how to use them without destroying them. Alfred's people managed their land through sustainable common systems, but it wasn't just about regulation, it was about psychology. They understood that the land wasn't just a resource to be exploited, but a partner to be respected. Medieval people were the original zero-waste movement, but not by choice, by necessity. And what they created was beautiful. Let's visit the workshop of Harold the Carpenter in 1256. Nothing, and I mean nothing, goes to waste. Wood shavings become kindling. Sawdust becomes insulation. Broken tools become materials for new tools. Even the smallest scraps of wood become toys for children or fuel for fires. In the kitchen of Marjorie the housewife, vegetable scraps become soup stock. Stale bread becomes pudding. Worn-out clothes become cleaning rags, then insulation, then eventually fertilizer for the garden. This isn't just about being economical, it's about understanding cycles. Medieval people understood that waste doesn't disappear, it transforms. And they made sure those transformations were beneficial. But here's what's really beautiful about medieval environmental consciousness. It was deeply emotional. People weren't just managing resources, they were tending relationships. William the Shepherd, walking the hills above his village in 1298. He knows every tree, every stream, every rock formation. He knows where the best grass grows, where the sheep like to shelter from rain, where the wolves might hide. But more than that, he knows the stories. That oak tree is where his grandfather first kissed his grandmother. That stream is where the village children learned to swim. That hill is where the old gods were worshipped before the Christians came. This is love, not abstract, not theoretical, but immediate and personal. William doesn't protect the land because he understands climate science. He protects it because it's home. Medieval villages were perfectly designed circular economies, though they didn't have a name for it. Let's trace the flow of resources through Little Wickham in 1334. The blacksmith's ashes become fertilizer for the fields. The fields produce grain for the miller and straw for the thatcher. The thatcher's old thatch becomes compost for the gardens. The gardens produce vegetables for the village and herbs for the healer. The pigs eat the kitchen scraps and produce manure for the fields. The chickens eat the bugs and produce eggs for the kitchen. The cows eat the grass and produce milk for the cheesemaker and leather for the tanner. Nothing is wasted, everything is connected, and the whole system is designed to regenerate itself. It's not just sustainable, it's regenerative. So here we are, at the end of our journey through the so-called Dark Ages. And I have to ask, who exactly were living in the darkness? We work longer hours than medieval peasants. We eat more processed food than they did. We have weaker communities, more anxiety, and less connection to the natural world. We've gained technology, but what have we lost? The medieval world wasn't perfect. Disease was common, life was hard, and individual freedom was limited. But they understood something we've forgotten. Human beings are not machines to be optimized. We're creatures who need rhythm, community, purpose, and connection to thrive. Maybe the Dark Ages weren't so dark after all. Maybe they were just lit by a different kind of light, the light of community, the light of craftsmanship, the light of living in harmony with natural cycles. I'm not saying we should give up modern medicine, democracy, or the internet. But maybe we can learn something from Thomas the Baker, who knew when to stop working. From Hildegard of Bingen, who understood that food is medicine. From the villagers of Little Wickham, who knew that no one prospers alone. The Dark Ages weren't dark because they lacked technology. They were dark because we stopped looking at them with the right kind of light. And maybe, just maybe, that light can help us see our own age more clearly. Dark Ages? More like slightly dim but surprisingly comfortable ages.